And so, ladies and gentlemen, we welcome in the voice of the New Orleans Saints in his second season, Zach Strief. Zach, how are you, man?
Patrick, buddy, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
I'm pleased as punch. Again, we have to counterbalance all this Texan stuff that's going on here on our station, so I need someone to give me some sense.
You got it.
All right, so anything that surprised you in the final cuts to get it down to 53, because we were talking about this earlier, this is an incredibly tough team to cut and an incredibly tough team to make because so many positions are solidified. Did anything surprise you with the cuts that went down?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's always a few, and we knew that this year was going to be tough. I mean, we really, had talked all through camp about how there was a lot of talent on this roster, and it was going to be hard to break it down. And, I think Chris Banjo is probably the biggest surprise, just with his prowess on special teams and what he added to the locker room. And I think it's way less a statement on his camp as it is on JT Grace, who really played phenomenal. And, on the other side of that is I think that the Saints value the cornerback position just slightly more than safeties, and
right.
They knew they could keep 11, and that that guy had to go somewhere, and so they went with the youth and JT Gray. But that was a little bit of a surprise. I think the biggest surprise is the trade for Kiko Alonso. That comes out of certainly not something any of us had expected or talked about. And I love the trade. I think they got tremendous production and talent for a guy that, quite honestly, as good of a camp as he had, and I thought he had a very nice camp. Nobody would have said three words if Vince Spiegel had been released here in New Orleans. And to get a guy with the type of production as Kiko, I think, is a real steal for the Saints.
It was almost like baseball with the Dolphins, right? It's like they're fire sailing in the middle of the year right before the trade deadline. They know they're not going anywhere, so they're just getting rid of as much as they can and stocking with young assets. So why not fleece them for a guy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, they're sitting there and saying, hey, we're not going to pay this guy next year. We might as well get something for him and unload the books and get some young blood in here, and that's what they did. And I appreciate them doing that because the Saints are ready to win right now. They're not, and I think that ultimately it was a deal that obviously worked for both squads, and I'm just very excited to have that kind of talent added to the roster. Especially in a direct trade for a player without anything given up in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Zach, you were a player, now a broadcaster. You kind of had to straddle both areas in the last several years. Before we talk a little bit more about the Saints, tell me about your first year, man. What did you learn? What was it like? Tell me about the transition to the booth, because let me tell you, when I made my transition to the booth, I hadn't played since fifth grade. So, I was fifth grade, and then I transitioned into the booth when I was in college, but you went basically right from the field upstairs to the booth. What was that transition like after your first year, man?
Well, it was, first of all, and Patrick, this, the job is so special and so unique. The opportunity to get to do this here is just, it's really been an amazing opportunity, an amazing experience, and the Saints have sure made it a lot of fun because they've been so good. We were so good last year and look to be this year. But it's a big transition. It's, I think the thing that I take away more than anything is an appreciation for how much work people have put in to get to this level. Just how much preparation it takes, how locked in you really have to be for these games to really be good at it. And certainly I've earned a great appreciation for the people that have done this for a long time and have done it at a high level. And, meeting people like yourself, Patrick, I mean, it's just been it's kind of a very cool, special fraternity that I'm very honored to be a part of. And, but it is a lot of work. And I think, every single game you learn a little bit more. Every week there's kind of the next level that you kind of pick up and, hey, I don't like how I say that, or hey, I need to control my tone here. And, for me, it feels a lot like playing offensive line. There's a lot of little details that nobody that's listening really cares about, but at the end of the day, if you really detail them and you perfect them, you're going to be much better off. And that's kind of how I've approached it. Is it's just starting over in the National Football League. It's just in a different location in the building.
Well, you and I are very similar. Both played offensive line, and both are broadcasters. I think we're virtually identical at this point, Zach.
We're almost brothers.
Yeah, at this point, yeah. Now again, I stopped playing in the fifth grade because I didn't like pain, so maybe we're not quite as similar in that regard. Talking to Zach Strief, the voice of the Saints. All right, Zach, this seems to be kind of like last year. The Saints maybe even got a little bit better in the offseason. It feels like is this a Super Bowl or bust kind of year for the Saints?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I don't think anybody's taking any moral victories out of not winning a Super Bowl. I think everyone is very aware of of the age of Drew Brees and the reality that is not going to last forever. And I think everyone feels that sense of urgency, to get ready for that. What's really great if you're a Saints fan is I think the Saints have done a tremendous job of flipping this roster from what, 3 or 4 years ago was one of the oldest rosters in the National Football League now to one of the youngest. And there's so much young talent on this team. I think they will be one of these squads that does not go through a rebuild per se when they lose their quarterback. I think they're in a good position to continue to be successful. But if you look at this year in general, yeah, I think as long as Drew Brees is here and this core of young players is around, it's absolutely Super Bowl or bust. I don't think anyone in that building is satisfied with anything less than that.
This may be something you can't really comment on, and you may know more than you can actually say here, but we talked a lot last year, and then of course there was a big article on ESPN about the difference in the first several games for Drew and then the last several games for Drew. We sort of posited that we thought there might have been some sort of an injury that he was fighting through because it seemed like the arm was a little bit different. You may or may not know anything about that we don't know, and obviously don't say anything you're not supposed to say, but was there a feeling among the fans there that it was there maybe was something going on medically and that was the reason why there was such a stark contrast, or was it just, hey, he was playing so well early on that it would have been virtually impossible to keep up that level of play?
Well, I think there's two things there. One, yes, I do think it was impossible to keep up that level of play. The pace he was on was really kind of stratospheric. The whole offense in general really was going to break about every record imaginable. However, it's not like it went from that level to just good. I mean, it really did drop off. But I'm not aware of even of anything that was physically ailing Drew. I know very much of several physical ailments affecting offensive linemen.
Yeah.
And I really think that it was more an issue. And if you go back and really watch those games, the level in which he was pressured in those games was very different. The rushing production was very different in those later games. And I just think that, these guys, listen, they're playing with things that are significantly reducing their effectiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the team and the players, and you have to understand how competitive a lot of these guys are. It's like, hey, you know what? I can go, I can physically go out there and do it. I need to do it. And sometimes 80% from one guy is more than 100% of another guy. And I really do think that there was a lot, and I know for a fact there was a lot of guys banged up inside. You obviously saw Max Unger retired from what was affecting him and
right.
his hip injuries. And, and those weren't even, Max's wasn't even an actual, it's not like there was an injury instance that happened. It's just a long, drawn-out, degradation of a joint in his body. And, it affected him greatly. You saw Larry Warford with the knee surgery this offseason. He was dealing with that throughout the year. Andrews Pete, who came in, off of a broken ankle. And then, obviously, Karan Armstead missed a whole lot of time. He goes down in the Cincinnati game. They get about one more game in, and then you kind of see that decline. So those things play massive roles in the way that guys perform. And I think that Drew was affected by it, and I think teams realized they were going to have the ability to get to the quarterback quickly, and so they kind of stood up on the line of scrimmage and double-teamed Mike Thomas off the line and said, you know what, we're going to let this pass rush get home. And I think a lot of the time they were effective at that.
Yeah, and they didn't have Ginn for a long, so they didn't really have a deep threat.
Correct.
I mentioned a lot that you could even see, and you probably saw it better than we could because you're kind of seeing the all-22 from where you are. I would imagine the safeties were playing a lot closer to the line of scrimmage later in the season because they were not threatened by anything down the field.
Well, and that's, one of the big discussions this offseason was about, having the tight end and the ability to stretch the field vertically in the middle of the field. And it's not even necessarily a tight end. Like you said, having a guy like Ted Ginn, you need somebody to force a safety to feel like they have to stay back in the deep middle of the field. It just allows teams to really constrict the coverage. And, you saw a lot of that last season, losing Ted, and I think Ted staying healthy would play a huge role for this team this year, as well as, Jared Cook playing anywhere near the level we saw him in training camp at practice play. Will pay big dividends for this team trying to get that secondary loosened up a little bit.
Talking to Zach Strief, the voice of the Saints. Zach, is there a question mark that you're looking to get answered early in the season? It feels like the team is so complete right now. Is there a position or a guy that you're looking at, okay, let me see what this guy looks like. This is a question I need answered.
I don't think so. I think that there's a lot of questions right now in the wide receiver room behind Mike Thomas and Ted Ginn, and I think that's fair. There's some young guys in there that we don't know that they're completely healthy. Keith Kirkwood and Austin Carr both missed time at the end of training camp. So I think that's probably the one location that you kind of say, do we know exactly what we have there yet? But more than anything, if there's a question that I'd like to see answered, and we're going to get the answer pretty quick here, is can the Saints turn around, their trend of slow starts?
Yeah.
They're 5-13 in their last 18 games in September. That's not a good record for a team that's been as successful as the Saints have been over the past few years. And they're opening up with a really rough stretch. Obviously, prime time this week against the Texans, who are a playoff caliber team. And then you go out west and you see the Rams and the Seahawks, both of which are going to be contenders in the NFC this year. Before you come back to the Cowboys, one of the few teams that beat you last season. So, there's a big test early here, and I think that's the big question: is can they kind of right the ship as far as it goes with how they start seasons out? Can they start better than they have in the past?
Speaking of the Cowboys, don't you love having a guy like Mike Thomas and watching his contract negotiations when you see what's going on with the Cowboys contract negotiations?
Well, it's certainly, listen, I think the Saints have always handled themselves the right way in that matter. It's great to see, Mike and the team come together on that deal. And I think a lot of it, those guys bring in people who are about the right things. And I think it was important to Mike to have a contract that made sense, but it also was important to the Saints that guys like Mike Thomas and really the guys behind him understood they were playing for an organization that took care of its players and, didn't push things to that level. So I think the relationship the players and the team have is really strong here.
Final thing, tell me your thoughts on Jermon Bushrod. He re-signed with the Saints. He retired. Obviously, you played with him for a while. You guys were together for a Super Bowl. Tell me your thoughts on Jermon.
Bushy's he came in my second year in the National Football League, and I remember fondly the first practice that Jermon was here with the Saints. He took a knee in the huddle during a team period, which is frowned upon, to say the least. And so, it's one of those things where you watch a guy grow, and we all did. I mean, we were growing together, but to watch a guy kind of blossom into what he did, to become a Pro Bowler, I love Jermon. He's a great example of somebody maximizing what they had and hiding the things that they weren't great at. And I think that's what makes great football players. And Jermon did that. He's a guy that struggled with power his whole career and developed a way to beat it. And I just like people that find ways to overcome, difficulties. And that's what Jermon was. And he's got a beautiful family. They have their fourth child on the way. And I'm trying hard. They were in the booth for the last preseason game, and I was fighting pretty hard to get him back here to New Orleans because his wife Jessica grew up here. So we're working on getting him back to New Orleans.
Awesome. Zach, man, best of luck this season. Looking forward to great things from the Saints this year, and looking forward to listening to your calls, my friend.
Great. Thanks so much, Patrick. Great talking to you.
You got it. Zach Strief, voice of the Saints.